A while back, I was photographing one of the world's most powerful men. He was running Google in Europe and the Middle East, and I went to his headquarters in the West End of London. And now we all know that Google are trying to take your data, but after having spent some time there, I realized they're after something a little bit more than that. Let's just say that around the same sort of time, I was photographing a very famous TV chef. And I mentioned the fact that I'd been photographing Matt Brittin at Google, and he said that he'd been paid to come in and teach the coders, the socially inept coders who don't have a girlfriend, who struggle with social anxiety, teach them how to cook. And the reason he'd been brought in was that they could then forge relationships with women who might also be working at Google, have children, create a family, and eventually the long-term aim of Google was to employ the children who have this kind of amazing gift for mathematics and coding and everything, and bring them into the Google family. I mean, it sounded kind of ridiculous at the time, but then I thought back to the actual shoot itself.
So Matt Brittin.
Yeah, and the thing that made the shoot really easy, apart from the fact that Matt Brittin used to be an Olympic rower, so he has amazing genes. I mean, he's about 6'6" or something. He's a Chad, an Ubermensch. The actual environment that Google have created is not. It's not like The Office with David Brent. It's not all grey. It's kind of a playground, really strange place that you don't want to leave. And after I did the shoot, I basically stayed there for the rest of the day. My car was parked up. I thought I might as well eat some sweets and have some food and hang out with the kind of international coterie of interesting people. It was extraordinary. But getting back to the shoot, because of the way the whole of the interior is designed, it's just like the perfect place to do a shoot. You know, there was a massive Union Jack that I could photograph him against, and then there was sort of gold sparkly wall. It's not at all like some kind of corporate environment, and that's what they want. They don't want people ever to leave. And so in amongst all the office is also a gym, and then you can have people come in and you can have some a massage, or it's like being on an international flight in upper class or first class, where you're kind of having a pedicure and you're getting your needs attended to. So you, instead of sort of thinking, oh my God, I've got to commute, you see these people on the tube and they look utterly depressed. They probably can't wait to get in there. You know, they're leaving all their troubles behind because you're going into this environment that is just wonderful.
You believe the conspiracy? You believe?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense because, as we alluded to, I mean, quite often people having this amazing ability with numbers and maths and so on doesn't necessarily, in the Venn diagram, that doesn't often overlap with people who have amazing social skills, and hence the need to kind of find these brilliant young men a girlfriend. And maybe the person I spoke to who told me this piece of information, that's why he was brought in, to sort of help them to cook and be able to do domestic stuff, have a shower and look after themselves. Don't just sort of be on the screen all the time. It's social engineering.
Yeah, the level of quality they bring in as well. This chef you're alluding to is top of the top. So
yeah, absolutely. And Matt Brittin was very, very different to another head of the BBC that I'd shot about 10 years before, which was Mark Thompson. And for that shoot, I went into the BBC and actually did a portrait of him in situ. But there's a big contrast, and it shows how society has changed, how business has changed. Mark Thompson has been really successful. He went after the BBC. He ended up running the New York Times, and I think he's now at CNN. So really successful, but he was a journalist. He sort of came from a very, very different background, worked his way up, obviously very, very talented. Another very tall man, We were talking about this, how most of the business people that I used to do a business portrait for Management Today every month, and I very rarely photographed anyone under 6 foot. And it does seem to be the case that it's probably similar for people with bald heads in the past. It's a disadvantage if you're in business. I think there's a disproportionately high number of people who are above average height.
Yeah, I mean, even just a psychological effect maybe of looking up at
Yeah.
someone quite tall.
And both Mark Thompson and Matt Brittin, they had this sort of natural authority. But Matt Brittin, the guy that's coming to run the BBC, was very, very much more of a tech mogul. But Mark Thompson also obviously made huge changes to the BBC and did a really great job. He introduced the iPlayer. My shoot with Matt was on digital, so I was using a digital camera, and it was just very, very simple. It just seemed like they'd set up one perfect sort of background after another. So I used lots of my own lighting. I mean, with the Union Jack, I used a ring flash, and then there was sort of this big kind of white plastic, sort of like a massive a bit like a light box with Google written on it, and I could just use the light from that. So it was quite well lit as well. So there were loads of creative opportunities, and handsome guy, creative opportunities. It's shooting fish in a barrel. It's easy. I think probably when he was appointed head of the BBC, I noticed that Getty, on their story, they put my picture with a Union Jack. And because he's British and the BBC is such a British institution, I think that's probably the most obvious picture in the set.
His last name being Brittin.
Yeah, absolutely. I did when I looked back at the shoot, without actually firing at the hard drives and looking at the pictures, think the picture I liked best was him sitting on these sorts of little boxes, coloured boxes, which correspond. Yeah, and I quite like those. But actually, it's quite often the case that the best pictures aren't the ones that you like best, because you're biased and you tend to think that pictures which were harder to get and more of a chore and needed to be kind of finessed are better than they are because they were hard to get. And the pictures that are really obvious, like sticking in front of a Union Jack and using the ring flash, are actually, you don't really need to do more than that. It's perfect with a name like Brittin.
Yes, given to you there and then. Cool, and he was nice?
He was really nice, and obviously, he was obviously going places.
Yeah, no wonder he's where he's at now.
Yeah, we'll see how he does. I mean, that with modern media, the whole kind of landscape has changed. You've got YouTube and so on. Good luck, because it's a very. I think they need someone with that degree of the depth of his knowledge, having worked in the tech field, will be something that he's going to have to draw upon.
What would you like to see improved at BBC?
I think that they have made mistakes. I'd like to see a broader political consensus in terms of their output, because it does seem quite, I'm a centrist and I'm sort of very liberal, probably quite progressive, but I'd like to see other voices, and I'd like to see a plurality of views, and they do try and do that. I mean, quite often, the fact that they get criticised from people on the right, but then they also get criticised from people on the left, shows that they're probably succeeding in ploughing the right furrow.
All right, thanks, Dad.
Pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Like and subscribe.
Cool. Yeah, actually, a lot of YouTubers say this, but I've got a percentage of the amount of people who aren't subscribed. I think it's like 65% of our viewers aren't subscribed. So
really,
yeah, it's quite high.
Yeah.
Cool.
This video is a bit dry and businessy, but I do think. I think I'm of the view that you have to remind people to subscribe, and so
Okay.
yeah.
Sweet. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.